What we're going to talk about today is blocking adverts on the browser. Here's a typical, I opened YouTube and before the video plays, I get an advert, and there's an advert over here, and there's an advert up there, and there's maybe half a dozen adverts per page, and they're a right royal pain. Here I'm opening somebody's blog, and as I open the blog, I get an ad pops out, and even when I get rid of that, there's an ad inserted in between paragraphs there, and there's another ad down the right-hand sidebar, all done at their end. Here's another one, more adverts. Look, put an advert in, half a dozen words, put an advert in, half a dozen words. It can be a real nuisance. Now, when you're in your browser and you send a request, you send it to the ISP. And it used to be the case when we were all boys that the ISP sent you back whatever it was you'd asked for. But no more. What happens nowadays is that the ISP will take the cookie information that it holds on you from the request, which says who you are and what IP address you are and all that good stuff. And then it adds the information that it knows about you. Because it's your ISP, it knows extra things about you. So it adds that information on, and it'll hold a little auction for those ad slots saying, does anybody want to sell anything to this person? Advertising providers will then bid for those ad slots. Now, the biggest advertising provider of them all is Google Ad Services, and they win 90% of these, but sometimes another advertising provider will put a bid in. But anyway, the bids for the auction in the ad slots produces revenue for the ISP. Out of that auction, a winning provider will appear, and he has bought the right to get advertising to you. So he then holds an auction to say, who wants to put adverts on this guy's web page that he's about to see? Advertisers then bid for those spaces, right? And the advertisers bidding for the spaces is what provides money to the provider to get, so that they can continue working. And eventually the advertiser who wins gets to send ad content to you along with the response from your ISP. I'm going to sit among the advertisers for a wee while. Now, you, in the meantime, think that you pressed the button and your screen loaded and it took about 100 milliseconds. All of this stuff up here and about here, about 100 milliseconds, which is why 15, 20 years ago, it took half a second for a web page to load when you had a 33K modem. Now you've got 20 gig internet and it still takes the same amount of time for a web page to load, because all this stuff is now going on in the background behind you with all these servers all over the world talking to each other. Now, if you're looking, not that I'm going to suggest that anybody here would be looking at that with the heart of a hacker, but if you're looking at that with the heart of a hacker, you notice a couple of things. First of all, the response that comes from the ISP comes from the domain that you requested. I asked for www.porn.com or whatever it was, whereas all the ad content comes from a not requested domain. It comes from some other URL that's not the URL that I asked for. Now, at low level, a firewall, what it does is it says, if this site is not the IP address that I started communicating with, then it's potentially duff and I don't want anything to do with it. So at web level here, all I have to do is simply break the circuit and say, I don't want the stuff that comes from other than the requested domain. And what I'll get is the same web page, but simply without adverts. And that's what we do. In order to do this, I go to my browser. Here's Google on a Firefox. Up at the top right-hand side, I put a little yellow marker round about what's called the hamburger menu. It's very, very similar, if not exactly the same, on Opera, on Chrome, on Chromium, on the various Microsoft ones. There's about 6 of these. They're all effectively the same. Open the hamburger menu, go to add-ons and themes, bolt-ins. And there's a bolt-in called uBlock, an extension called a uBlock. And uBlock isn't an ad blocker, it's a domain blocker. Right, I'll explain the difference in a wee minute. So when I press the fill in uBlock there and search for it, up comes this. uBlock origin has, that was this morning, 5.6 million downloads. It's a very, very popular thing. And you basically click on that. There's the add to Firefox button. And as you add it to Firefox, a little thing will appear in the top right-hand side of your browser, near the hamburger menu and very close to my self-portrait. When you put your mouse over that button, it will tell you, I've just done a Google search, and in that Google search, 20 domains were blocked in that Google page, right? 3 out of the 3 domains that were in that Google page connected, but I blocked 27% of the content of that page. And since I installed this a couple of weeks ago, 17% of all the stuff that I was going to download hasn't get downloaded because of uBlock. It's very, very simple. Now, it works for Firefox, it works for Chrome, it works for Microsoft, it works for Opera. This is where you get it from if you want to go and get it yourself, right? Normally, you just, in Firefox or Chrome, you just go to the add extensions. And when you go to the add extensions, it installs it for you. But if you want to go and do it the hard way, you have to go to this GitHub page. And I've left that up for a wee minute so that you can see that URL. Advantages, transparency. The elements that are getting filled in with an advert are typically divs, HTML divs divisions or HTML frames. And if you supply a div or a frame with null content, then that div or frame renders in the browser as nothing. So what happens is you don't get, if it's an ad blocker, it's got a list of people and advertisers. And if it sees something from them, it says, no, you're not having that. So I'll put a grey box in instead of that advert. And you end up with your page covered in these grey boxes where the adverts are. You'd be as well with the ads. Whereas this thing simply ignores that part of the web page getting loaded. And so the web page loads and renders normally as if that advert had never happened. Yep. And it also checks web pages, right? Now I'll explain that in the next slide. A firewall blocks network traffic, basically at the network hardware, and says, no, that stuff's not getting in. I don't know what's in that packet. It's not getting in. Antivirus, once the packets are in your machine and they're either in the processor or in the memory, then the antivirus says, oh, I don't know if I like that. That looks like it could be dodgy, and it blocks it there. An ad blocker is inside the browser and it blocks and says, no, you're not, I'm not displaying that because in an advert, I'll put a grey box up and instead. This doesn't. This will actually just block certain domains. One of the things that it's good for is if you're using a web-based email client, then it'll stop phishing emails because the phishing emails are not coming from the right domain. So it'll stop some of that. One of the things that it also blocks is The thing's called uBlock Origin, and there's somebody's put up a web page with dodgy stuff on it called ublock.org. And if you're not told about this, if you're not informed about it, then you might go to ublock.org. But if you try to go to ublock.org and uBlock is up, it'll stop you going to pages that it knows are duff, including the one that looks like itself. So it's a really, really useful wee tool. That's it. That's all I'm doing today. I was going to do more, but time's not on our side.